Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live stream. And what is a really sad day, really, isn't it? It's because we're not going to have the Imola weekend that we all look forward to and love. I think we all love it. Obviously, bittersweet memories from that race over the years, but very sad to see so much trauma and loss of life as well in the floods and landslides in the Imola region. And our thoughts, as everybody has expressed in Formula One, our thoughts go out to those who have really suffered from this. And a great decision, I think, to stop the race, not have the weekend. It was inevitable. The paddock was completely flooded. Nothing could be done. And yeah, just a sad, funny weekend. But anyway, here we are with the live stream. So welcome to everybody from wherever you're watching around the world, whatever time zone you're in. Thank you very much for joining us. Lots of chat ahead, probably. Lots of comments ahead, probably, because we got a free weekend coming up. I might try and do a couple more live streams just to keep things ticking over the weekend. Although, like everybody else in Formula One, immediately made other plans. Wow, a free weekend. And I suppose there will be some members of the Formula One circus who'll be saying, well, this was a triple header and it's kind of nice now not to be so locked into that. So yeah, here we are on this Wednesday, and I'd just like to welcome my two partners on the channel. Jetcraft, I think most of you have known for quite a long time, and you see the logo down there below me on the banner. The world's largest buyer and seller of executive jets, great company, and you don't see them exposing themselves to the public that much. It's all within the industry, but a great company and very much a part of the, well, I guess the Formula One world in which we live, isn't it? Not only Formula One, but a lot of sports. If you look at companies like Wheels Up, for example, which is a jet leasing company, those bulk of those aircraft they would get from Jetcraft. Good example. And I'd also like to mention now, first time here on the banner, you can see it below, Pitbox, which is a great software. This is a new software. It's going to be launched on the market fairly soon, but we've got prime preview of it. I'm just wondering, I just want to check something, make sure everything's still looking there. We seem to have lost Pitbox all of a sudden. I don't know what happened there. Let me just check. New Pitbox banner. There we go. What are we doing here? Anyway, Pitbox, great company, and started from an amazing coincidence, really. I was on a flight to, I think it was Australia, it might have been Singapore, and a young Australian came up and introduced himself, said he had read a lot of my stuff and knew who I was, kind of thing. Amazing. Really cool guy, Elliot Miller. It turns out to be a very good cricketer, as it turns out, but he was just, I think he was at college at that point and at uni, and he wrote this software, and here we are, I don't know, probably 8 years later, and the product is now up and running. It's a really, really cool bit of software that enables teams. I don't think this applies to Formula One because all the Formula One teams do their own software in this department. But in terms of data gathering and putting it together in a way that's usable and doable, and it's more importantly protecting your IP, this is a brilliant thing. Get rid of the spreadsheets, use Pitbox, and all of a sudden you can access data, historical data and real-time data within seconds, and therefore race engineers, drivers, coaches, everyone involved can spend more time making informed decisions, if you like, rather than just, looking through data. So it's a really good thing, and I think it's going to be a big deal in national racing, if that's the right word, in Europe, North America, and the Australasian region as well. Yeah, it seemed to have had a slight glitch there. I'm not quite sure what to do about this because there should be that banner below me, and it just kind of suddenly went away. I think I know what's happened, actually. I think I uploaded it, and I forgot to click the loop on it. I think that's what's happened, so I'm not sure. Let me see if I can do this when we're live. I'm not sure I can, or maybe we can. Loop, there you go. Let's have a look, see if it comes back. There we go. Mega. How's that? How's that for improvised technology from P. Windsor? I'm here in Spain, just apropos that at all. Read the local newspaper. I love the local newspapers in well, whenever I'm traveling, really, I was going back all the years traveling in Formula One, you go to somewhere like Argentina or Brazil or Hungary, and there'll always be a sort of English language tabloid newspaper, which was basically just an accumulation of all the news services around the world, with no opinion in the writing at all. It was sort of straight facts, and it was so refreshing to read these newspapers with just straight facts. And here in Spain, I've started reading the local English paper, and the same thing. It's all just local news. If it's any bad news, they don't print it at all. It's all just normal stuff. And anyway, there's a thing here in Spain about how to educate I guess it's over 65s on the use of computers and software and mobile phones, because that's where banking, apart from anything else, is gone. And so there's a big initiative in the local government council to train all the elder statesmen of the area. I think that's pretty cool, actually. Nice thing. Apropos nothing at all. Apropos Windsor, the aged Windsor getting that sorted. I'm quite proud of myself to be able to do that. So yeah, we've got a big thanks again to Pitbox and to Jetcraft, without whom I wouldn't be able to do all this stuff. So I'm really pleased to have them on board. And you fans as well. Thank you so much. I know there's a bit of a sort of preamble going on here, and I will get onto the chat, don't worry. Bit of a, just wanted to say thank you to everybody, because without the response we're getting, certainly to that poll we did, and now chat and comment, of course, from my point of view, it wouldn't be quite as much fun, but it is, and it's brilliant. I love it. So here we go. And I've said in the description, by the way, description of Pitbox is in the description below this video. When we go off air and you watch it as a video, you can see the description there and the links and stuff to Pitbox. If you are a racer of any type and you've got some sort of race team, have a look at this product. It's really good. That's one thing. The other thing is, I just wanted to talk about Imola and how it's affected Formula One over the years, and how big a race it is, and how to lose it from the calendar at this stage is so ironic, isn't it? It really is. It brings the total number of races, if they don't replace it, down to 22, which again, I think a lot of Formula One people will breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief on that one. But of course, it does mean loss of revenue. There will be all sorts of dramas from this. I wouldn't want to be involved in any of the insurance companies around at the moment, being asked to look at this situation on behalf of any of the clients involved. But it is a big thing. And in Imola, I say this in the context of Stefano Domenicali, who grew up in the area, and Imola was his hometown as a kid and as a young man as well, and learning his trade in Formula One and in motorsport. And from there he went to Ferrari. And I can't imagine what this is like for him, and how sorry he must be feeling right now for everybody in the region and for the race organisers and everybody involved. So, as well as saying our thoughts go out to everybody, my thoughts go out to Stefano, actually, because he's a real racer, Stefano, in the sense that he has racing blood in his veins, and to have to live through this weekend as he is. I'm sure he'll be down there getting his hands dirty, helping as much as possible, as will probably quite a lot of Formula One people. And we know how much Mario Isola of Pirelli gets involved with the fire service in Italy. I'm sure he'll be there, arms, sleeves rolled up, getting involved as well. So, I just want to say that about Imola, because, it's more than just another Grand Prix. It's more than just another motor race. It is Imola, and it's a serious Grand Prix. And then we also have, coming up fairly shortly, I recorded a conversation with Shubham Sangodkar, who I think some of you already know. We've had him on live streams already, and some of my video going out after races or during race weekends. A very, very good young aerodynamicist, qualified aerodynamicist, who did 2 years work experience at Red Bull, not only in the aero department, but just, again, getting his hands dirty. Again, a real racer, I think, and just loves the sport. And here he is doing all sorts of analysis. And so I recorded, and I'll play it fairly shortly, I recorded on Zoom a chat with him. First of all, a sort of generic look at floors, 2023 spec, and what the airflow is under a floor. And secondly, he looks at stuff we haven't really had to spend a lot of time on, the floor edges of the McLaren. Okay, I know McLaren not going really well at the moment, but nonetheless interesting to see what they are doing and the small differences that are showing up. And I think it highlights the tiny, tiny stuff now that we have to talk about. If we want to talk about upgrades and differences, I know there probably would have been some quite big upgrades for Imola, Mercedes particularly. But overall, the upgrades are, cut out here, cut out there, extra strake here. And that, that's really difficult to impart to the fans, I think. But anyway, I think Shub does that really well. So what I'm going to do, I think, is start with some of the questions and comments. There's a lot of chat coming through already, and I'm always guilty of not getting through everything. And apologies again in advance if I don't get to you by the end of this. Equally, we'll stop after 5 or 10 minutes, and we'll have a look at what Shub's got to say. So first out of the blocks, first comment, which came in well before the show started, a couple of hours before the show started, from Victor Rodriguez. Hi Peter, I read that Honda's engine is the best performer in high altitude circuits. I heard especially the turbo part. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I guess the teams have their own analysis, very detailed analysis of how the engine performs, the various engines perform, Mexico City being the obvious example, but there are others as well. Brazil, I think it is. Yeah, Sao Paulo. So, yeah, I mean, my experience with Honda is that even back in the 80s, they were doing proper bench testing involving altitudes, ambient temperature changes, ambient conditions, and by now 2023, what are they going to be doing? Yeah, I'm sure they're state of the art. That's not to say that Mercedes, Ferrari, and I was going to say Renault, but I doubt Renault are actually, but certainly I think Mercedes and Ferrari are right there as well in that area, but maybe Honda just do a really, really good job. But having said all of that, you've got to bear in mind the cars that they are cited in, the Red Bull RB19, the RB18 last year, and the 18B, and that's, how much wing they run is obviously going to have an effect as well. I know the teams can do quite a lot with audio or sonic analysis as well, but I think, we should always be careful of going on about how good the Honda engine is without remembering how good the RB19 is. And if you've got a good car, the engine can look pretty good, even if it's no better than the others around. But yeah, Honda have always been really good, and no reason to think they're not brilliant there now. Hidi Zutphen, hi Peter. Could you reminisce a little bit about the current top 3 drivers? Who do you mean by the top 3 drivers? When was the first time you heard about them, and when did you realize there was something special? Max, I've known Joss for a long time, obviously when he was racing in Formula One. And so when Max started racing karts, whenever I saw Joss, he always sort of filled me on how it was going. And when in these situations, I often say to the dads, in the nicest possible way, I mean, how good do you think he really is? I kind of phrase it like that. And it's quite interesting. I mean, if somebody like Joss says, this guy is really quick, you pay attention and you listen. And so it was then really, I saw him in Formula 3, Euro F3 for the first time. Never saw him in karts, sadly, but saw him in Euro F3. And straight away, he just looked, $1 million. So, yeah, no surprise that he adapted so quickly to Formula One and went as well as he did. He's that sort of driver. He's just 100% got it in every dimension. One of the greats. Lewis Hamilton. First saw Lewis, obviously read a lot about him, heard a lot about him, stayed away from all the hype, as I tend to do. That's more PW rather than anything else. I mean, there's a lot of hype around a guy or a girl, a driver. I tend not to sort of follow the masses and just sort of wait and see if it comes into my peripheral vision, and if so, take a look. And the first time I saw him was at a GP2 test at Valencia, at the start of his F2 career. GP2 career. And I remember sitting in the grandstand. It was pretty cold. It was early in the year, obviously, and watching him into turn 1 at Valencia. This is the Valencia street racetrack, not the street course, and which is a pretty quick corner, pretty nice corner. And he was just wonderful in there. Early turn in, soft, compliant. Compared with everybody else, he just stood out a mile. And I introduced myself, and we sat down. I sat down with him and his dad Anthony in the grandstand long after the test. Empty grandstand. We just chatted a lot, got to know him then, and known him pretty well. Not pretty well. That's not true to say. But I know him to say hi and chat ever since, and he drives exactly the same way, exactly that. And I've read through some of the comments. I know Mark Hughes has recently said, Lewis doesn't drive with an early approach to the rotation point, and he's more abrupt and brakes later than Max. I don't see that. I mean, I can't comment on what other people say, but to my eye, and I've never seen Lewis not do this, he's very early turn in, shortens the corner brilliantly. Everything is soft touch, everything is supple. Yes, he can brake late frequently, but it's not because he's a late braker, and that's his thing. He can brake later than anybody else, and then he'll sort the corner out once he's braked later. He often ends up braking later because his feel for the car and how to use the brake pedal and for how to hit the brake pedal initially is so good, and he gets more response from the tires and the brakes than most drivers. And because of that, of course, he can start braking later than he can brake. He obviously brakes as late as he needs to brake, and it's because he brakes so well, not necessarily because he is a inverted commas late braker. And I think a lot of people get confused by that when they're looking at data, and that's why I'm not a fan necessarily of all that stuff that comes up on the screens quite a lot. Who's braking later, who's on the power sooner, who's got the higher minimum speed. All of that is just a snapshot that doesn't actually tell us a story behind the action, the footwork and the handwork. So Lewis is exactly that guy. Very, very soft and supple, very short corners, beautiful to watch. I've said it before, a guy like Lewis, guy like Max, I could go to a circuit and watch them drive on their own all day and be very happy and really enjoy what I was watching, as distinct from a Grand Prix with a multitude of place changes, to be honest. That's how much of a purist I am. B, that's how good I think they are at what they do. Top three, I'd have to put Charles Leclerc as the third. Charles, I just knew his name from very early Formula 3, was it by then? I think it was F3 by then. I went when he was about to win the F3 championship. I think it was F3 rather than GP3. Excuse me if it wasn't. At Jerez, I went there just as a fan, just to see Charles win that, because by then I was a totally committed Charles Leclerc fan in the way he drove. I didn't really know him that well, just enough to say hi to, and just exactly the same thing. I had exactly the same feeling about Charles as I did about Lewis and Max and the way he drives. And I was there at Jerez when he clinched the championship. I've actually got a Prema T-shirt saying, champion Charles Leclerc, Prema, blah, blah, blah. And I've got Charles to sign it. That's how bad I am as a race fan. So anyway, they're my three, and that's how I kind of met them, and obviously, know them pretty well. I've known them ever since, basically. So here we go. The next question, M.A. Khan. Mark Hughes, and I think you mean the Mark Hughes who writes for Autosport, not the Mark Hughes who's the publisher of some very good books. A brother of Mark Hughes, the brother of Warren Hughes, very good racing driver. Mark Hughes has said that Max has a similar driving style to Michael and Mansell. Yeah, I'd go with that. Although I've always said Michael is was a little bit sharper than Max and Nigel. A little bit sharper with his inputs, but very much the same in terms of short corners, early turn in, etc. I was surprised to hear Mark Hughes say that Lewis is a more conventional driver using the geometric line. Well, all I can say is I've never seen Lewis use a geometric line. I've seen him, that around slow corners, hairpins and stuff. Hairpin, Suzuka, very good example. He tends to sort of use a wide, you see him going in quite wide, but then he stays wide. He's actually on a constant radius wide line. That's where he feels the grip is. It's not because he wants a wide entry into the corner. So, you put him alongside anybody, put him alongside George, put him alongside Valtteri, put him alongside Nico, in Mercedes, put him alongside Alonso, Kovalainen, Button, shorter corners, and all of those guys. And you watch him wheel to wheel with Max, and he's identical to me. They both got short corners, and they both drive in a very, very similar way. So I'm a bit confused as to why Mark would say that. Obviously, that's what he sees, but I can't speak for somebody else. I can only speak for myself. He's quoting him now. Lewis tends to drive very late and hard on the brakes. Well, I would totally disagree with that. I think he's got an incredibly soft initial brake pedal application, as shown in 2007 alongside Alonso on the carbon industry brakes. And he was so good on those with initial brake pedal pressure that it forced Alonso to go to Hitcos, which has a much softer feel. Very aggressive on steering. Again, I don't see that at all. I would say if he was talking about Alonso there, I would think, initial turn in, he is aggressive. Lewis, aggressive on the steering? No. That's like saying sugar isn't sweet. I mean, I just don't get that. And follows a geometric line through the corner rather than early turning. Yeah, sorry, I don't see that at all. I can't comment, what other people say, what other people think. As most of you who watch my live streams now probably know that I tend not to spend too much time worrying about that. I tend to just do my own thing and look at what I look at, form my own opinions on what I see and what I can understand is going on. And that's what I do, really. I don't spend a lot of time reading about other people. So I'm just surprised that he would say that, because I've never, ever seen Lewis ever being aggressive with the steering or following a geometric line to a geometric apex is what I think he means. So, yeah, very weird. Very weird that we could be so different on that. But I'm glad that he agrees with me about Max, Michael, and he hasn't seen Nigel. Absolutely, yeah. It doesn't mention Charles in any of that. Anyway, Joanna Van H. Good evening, all. Good evening, Joanna. Johanna? Yeah, Johanna. Sorry. Sean Hines. Wonder if you're any relation to Mark Hines. Interesting. What's your assessment of Lance? With arguably the second best car on the grid, his performance is not acceptable. How likely is he to be replaced, assuming they have a car worthy of constructors in 2024? Well, I would say he's got the third best car on the grid, because I think Sergio Perez has got the second best car on the grid. Anyway, I'm just splitting hairs now. Well, I mean, we all know why that team even exists. It exists because Lawrence Stroll believes, I'm sure he's not the first dad to believe this, believes his son is a potential Grand Prix winner, stroke world champion, has the talent to do it for sure, and has created the platform to enable his son to do that. And they've always wanted to get drivers like Vettel and then Alonso this year in there, because they're sort of benchmarks, because they're world champions, multi-world champions. And if Lance can look good alongside them, then that shows how good Lance is in the mind of Lawrence Stroll, I suspect. And I think it worked out really well with Sebastian Vettel, because Lance looked pretty good on occasions alongside Sebastian Vettel. It's not working out that well alongside Fernando Alonso, because Fernando Alonso is a very different animal to Sebastian Vettel. And right now, if you were absolutely inside the mind of the Strolls, not necessarily Lance, but Lawrence, I would imagine he's thinking, did we make a mistake signing Fernando? And because he would want to see Lance up there within a tenth of Fernando and running ahead of him periodically, not majority of the year, obviously, but periodically. And to give you an idea, this is only third-hand information, and I don't want to quote anybody here, but I know that actually about this time last year, when Sebastian Vettel, I think, was ahead of Lance on points at Aston Martin, and there was an agreement that they would alternate one driver to the other in terms of who got the new upgrade if there was only one iteration of that upgrade, and Lance got the first one. They got to the Spanish Grand Prix, and Vettel was not only ahead on points, but it was his turn to get any upgrades that were there, and then the upgrade for Spain went to Lance. And Sebastian kind of didn't create a massive fuss about it, but mentioned it to a few people, who then went to Lawrence Stroll, I understand, and Lawrence wouldn't move on it. So, that is how much he believes in Lance and wants Lance to succeed. And as I say, I'm sure there are many dads out there who feel the same way. He's gone a long way, hasn't he? I mean, he's basically obviously financed Lance's racing career since karting, and it was pretty high budget even in the karting days. And now basically he's created this Formula One team for him, and they're going to a new factory and everything's, 5-star. So what you're basically saying, Sean, is will Lawrence Stroll ever concede that Lance isn't going to make it and then continue running that team without Lance? I don't think he will. I think that team is built for Lance. And if Lance tomorrow decided he didn't want to race Formula One anymore and wanted to go rallying or do something else, downhill skiing, I don't think Lawrence Stroll would continue too much longer to run that team, to own that team. I think he'd try and sell it straight away and it would move on. I think he's only doing it for his son Lance. So the odds of him saying, "Oh, my son's not up to it, I'm going to sign Pierre Gasly in the other car," forget it. It's never going to happen. So it's always going to be Lance's team in effect. And I think right now Lawrence would be as worried about why Lance isn't going as quickly as Fernando as he is possibly happy about how good the car is and how well Fernando's going. So yeah, funny times really. I don't think we've ever had that situation in Formula One to that extent. We've had it obviously to many extents, but not to that extent. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I don't. Lance never strikes me as the happiest guy in Formula One who just loves what he's doing and he's totally into it. He always looks like it's all a bit of an effort. I don't know. You hear all these stories coming out of the team about how he's not 100% focused. No, that's not the right phraseology. If he's due to turn up at a certain time, he doesn't necessarily turn up at that time, I suppose is the right way of putting it. But we're getting down to nitty gritty that is only hearsay. So I don't want to say any more than just my opinion, which is that I don't think there's ever going to be a point where Lawrence Stroll would say, "I'm going to fire my son and hire somebody else." I just don't think that would happen. That's the bottom line to my answer. Luke Noonan, hi Peter, what's your assessment prediction on the Merc upgrades? Will it solidify them in P2 or will it be a letdown? Well, depends on what you're expecting, doesn't it? The size of the letdown will be based on your hope of what it would be. If you're hoping it'll suddenly make it as quick as a Red Bull, I think you'll be pretty let down. If you're looking for something that might give them a little bit more consistency, a larger sweet spot, then operating windows they call it, then yeah, maybe it'll do that. I mean, it was interesting to read what they're saying about the upgrades, which is basically that this is the start of a new path which we believe will long term will take us back to the front and winning races. So the implication is it's the beginning of, they've made their decision on where they're going to go with the car, and this is the first step in going in that direction. So whether they're going to get away from the whole zero pod thing, and this is the first step towards going towards a conventional car, remains to be seen, obviously. But my bet is that they are still going to soldier on with this car, but obviously make some changes based on better correlation between modelling CFD and wind tunnel testing, now that they've got a little bit more testing time, not being the world champions last winter. And that correlation is going to be important in terms of the next step. So opinion, as I said before, I think Red Bull will probably pull the plug on development on this car around Spa time, because they'll be thinking already then of 24 and they've got this year's championship sewn up. So at that point, I think that's when you might start to see a Mercedes or a Ferrari or possibly even an Aston, really pretty close to a Red Bull. But it'll be an artificial thing because, as I said before, Red Bull will be at that point beginning to look ahead to 24, a little bit towards, like the back end of last year as well. Paul led 111. Will Perez win in Monaco to boost his World Championship aspirations? Will Monaco suit him as much as Baku? Oh, yeah. Perez has definitely got at least, he's got Sainte Devote, he's got exit of Casino Square, he's got exit of Mirabeau, that's 3. He's got exit of Portier, 4. He's got exit of the chicane, 5. And he's got exit of Rascasse, 6. And exit of what's that last corner called? Forgotten. Come back to me in a bit. Anyway, that last corner onto the pit straight. So he's got 7 corners out of what, there's only about 4 corners that he hasn't got, where he isn't going to be feeling, this is what I do well. This is, the car feels great. It's even better than last year. Brilliant. And he'll be good on all those corners for sure. He'll be as good as Max on exit. And he'll be good in terms of time management, and he'll be as good in terms of time management, and he'll be, it doesn't really matter on those corners what you're doing into those corners, really, if you're going to be that good mid-corner. I suppose top of the hill, Casino Square, is one place where Max will be phenomenal. Not suppose, he will, for sure. And he'll have Perez there, but Perez will probably make up for it from sort of, a settled car, not going quite as quickly, and then he'll get the rotation into that downhill bit out of Casino. He'll be really good there. And so where else will Max be good? Max will be good at high-speed braking into the chicane. Over the, as they come down out of the tunnel, Max will be really good there, I think. I won't say he'll necessarily brake later than Perez. He might not, but he'll be really good in getting the car stopped at exactly the right rate and giving himself exactly the platform he needs there. But again, Perez will be able to compensate with his exit out of there. He'll be very good on exit. To back and entry to the swimming pool will be where Max is really good, and then braking into the tight exit of the swimming pool, Max will be good there. That bit there, I wouldn't have said that's a Perez bit actually, because that's more to do with how you do the change of direction and how you've gone into that corner. And the straight's not really long enough to reward a Perez performance there. And braking into Rascasse, I think Max will be really good with load on the car, braking in early, turn into the right part of it. So overall, bearing in mind, we're talking unbelievably subtle differences. When I talk about, this will be good for Perez, this will be good for Max, I'm talking about tiny, tiny things. And there will be moments on soft tyres when Max is absolutely as good as, on one lap, as good as Perez in a couple of those traction areas. But because he'll be better in a couple of other big areas, I still think overall the lap will go to Max in terms of all things being equal, no traffic, new sets of soft tyres, Q3, both get in the lap they want to, and nobody hits the wall at the last minute. I still think that'll be Max. But in a race situation, if there's some schmozzle over pit stops, and if tyre management and if extending the stint is very important, Perez will be right there. And yeah, of course he can win that race. Of course he can win the Monaco Grand Prix. So can Max Verstappen. And you got to assume that Charles is not going to be slow at all at Monaco in that Ferrari, and that either George or Lewis and or both are going to be pretty near them. And Fernando too in the Aston Martin is going to be really, really quick in the race. Not necessarily fighting for the front row, I don't think. Unless, let me rephrase that. If Fernando also gets in the perfect lap, gets the tyre temperatures perfect on the out laps, gets no traffic, and he's on a really good set of Pirelli softs, yes, absolutely, he could be on the pole at Monaco. But certainly in the race, he could be devastatingly good in the race as well. So Monaco, people keep saying, Monaco boring. I think I'm fascinated to see how it's going to go at Monaco, actually, because it is a bit of a lottery, obviously in qualifying, to do with traffic, getting the tyre temperatures right, getting in a good lap anyway. All that's a bit of a lottery. And then the race, yeah, we've seen that obviously the pole dominates the race, but so many things can go wrong in the race, in terms of pit work, because it's a funny pit lane there, and everything's more congested than normal, and you see more errors usually in the pit lane than normal. Obviously safety car deployments, and generally speaking, all the other things that come into play at Monaco, who knows, might rain, again. Haven't even looked at the forecast of Monaco, keep looking at the forecast for Imola. Looks like it's clearing up a bit. Not clearing, it's less rain, which is a good thing, poor people there. 11th Street King. I'll tell you what, I'm just going to get up and turn off this fan. I hope everybody can let me do that for 2 seconds. I have a fan on because with the lighting and stuff, it does get quite warm, but it's a bit blowy actually. So there we go. Probably a bit less noise as well. I hope that I've tested it before. There's not much background noise from that fan, but you'll probably notice now there is. Shouldn't have the fan on, Pino. So 11th Street King, that's a good name, says Checo will win Monaco. I can feel it. Yep. He could well win Monaco, definitely. And I think, sorry, just going back to that previous question from Paul Ed 111, he was saying, will Monaco suit him as much as Baku? And you see, the thing about Baku was that Sector 1 contains all those Perez traction points with very long straights straight afterwards, rewarding them. So the straights obviously aren't as long at Monaco after these Checo corners. And what made that so significant in Baku was the tyre management situation, which is why I'm always saying that Red Bull pitwall people were lucky that the safety car came out, because at that point, Checo was in much better shape with his tyres because of how good he was in Sector 1. Whereas Max was having to punish the tyres more in Sector 1 and therefore couldn't really do much in Sector 2, which is his sector. I don't, if Monaco, it's unlikely that Monaco is going to fall into such a critical tyre management race situation. I don't think it will. I mean, part of that was ambient temperatures as well. It was hot. I mean, Monaco's a slightly different deal on that. So in that sense, maybe Monaco doesn't suit Checo as much as Baku, but it's not to say he's not going to be really quick there. It's just that what he's really good at doing may not get the same rewards as they did at Baku. Hope that makes sense. HMR Head. I wonder if in relation to Patrick Head. Anyway, race weekend cancelled. Sad to miss it, but hope everyone is okay. Yeah, we share your sentiments. I think everybody who's in Formula One, follows Formula One, shares your sentiments there. It's not so much the cancellation of the race. It's knowing that people's lives have been upturned, and I mean, floods are a horrendous thing, aren't they? And it's dangerous as well. I mean, it's landslides, it's people being caught in cars, upturned cars, all sorts of things. Terrible. So, yeah. 11th Street King says, I think Sergeant Debris or Leclerc crashes in qualifying at Monaco. Okay. Sergeant Debris, you mean he's going to crash as well, isn't he? Leclerc crashes. Yeah, I mean, poor old Charles. He'll be thinking after Miami, won't he? He'll be thinking, I can't hit the wall at Monaco again. I've done enough of that. But I want to be quick. I want to win Monaco. As I said at the time, I just hope he's got good management around him who can put his mind at the right sort of level, which is let the track come to you. It's a street circuit. It'll be a very different circuit on Sunday to the one you drive on Friday morning, and let the track come. Don't push harder than the track wants you to go, and let that time come with the tyres and the grip, and be patient. Patience is what Monaco is all about. And I suspect that's the one thing that Charles at the moment doesn't have a lot of. But I hope Freddie Vasseur after Miami has thought, I didn't really get that right, and I shouldn't have allowed that to happen. And we need to make sure Charles in good shape for Monaco. I hope that's it. Pine XD, hi Peter, how are you? I'm very well, thank you very much. Thank you. Vincent Rass, Mr. Windsor, you don't need to start this 10 minutes before broadcasting. 3 minutes is enough. Oh, well, okay, thank you. But the reason I do that is because that's what my colleague Vinny gave me. That's the loop he gave me, starting in 10 minutes. And I said, oh, okay. On the assumption that's what everybody does on these live streams. But you're telling me it's only 3 minutes. I actually quite like that 10-minute one. I'll tell you why, because it makes me think, oh wow, that's live. I better get my act together. I've got 10 minutes to get it together, and if I only gave myself 3 minutes to get it together, I'd probably be half asleep still. So I don't know. I might take your advice or I might not. Javier Velasco. Love your channel, Peter. Finest in YouTube Formula One. Thank you very much. My question is, how can we train ourselves to watch the nuances of the races? I'm always impressed how you talk about the difference between drivers. Okay. It's come out as TENUAVCES. The maybe you mean the nuances is probably what you mean. Yeah, well, obviously I've been watching races for a long time. That's the first thing. And watching drivers for a long time. And I've talked a million hours with drivers about the way they drive and what driving is all about. So that's one thing. In terms of watching what they're doing on any given weekend, you're in the hands of the TV director. And at some circuits, it's really, really difficult. And I'd be willing to bet they don't have the right angle that I would have if I was the director going into Casino Square, for example. I bet they don't have the really perfect head-on that you need there on the outside. It'll be slight angle, and you won't get quite the thing. 910 at Bahrain, very good example as well. Occasionally you get to see it from when they're using was it a drone or a balloon or something overhead. You say, oh wow, they've shown the whole of 910, mega. You see that. Silverstone head-on. Miami, let me think about Miami. Yeah, Miami wasn't bad. There's very fast S's after in the first sector where Max got it wrong in qualifying. I mean, those were really, every time you watched a car go through that, not onboards, forget the onboards. I don't think you can ever tell anything from onboards. I'm always talking about looking at the car, action shot. And I think you could tell a lot there. The change of direction, the way the drivers are doing the change of direction through there was really visible. So in that sense, I really liked the Miami circuit. Of the other tracks we've been to, Melbourne was not very good for looking at the sort of stuff. I mean, whatever that turn is, the right-hander at early part of the lap after the long straight, it's probably turn 4. That's not bad. Braking into there, you can see a little bit of how they brake from high speed, and you can see a little bit of who's going for an early, shorter corner. But I was trying to think. Around the back, when it was in that funny DRS zone, a very, very fast S thing there, that was quite good. Steering inputs into there, you could tell quite a lot. And the last 2 Mickey Mouse corners, I don't know. I mean, it was just mega understeer, wasn't it, the second last corner? So you couldn't really tell a lot between the drivers, although you could tell who was giving it too much throttle out of that last corner going into the next one. And you could see drivers like Perez, for example, who were just getting it beautifully harmonious through there. And then we went to Baku. Baku, I thought, was really good. You could tell a lot in Baku, particularly that Sector 1. And there were a lot of good shots there, I thought, from the director. And Monaco, where I'll be looking at Monaco entry to the swimming pool. They usually show that quite well. They tend to spend a lot of time with close-up shots at the hairpin and stuff. You can't really tell much from that. But breaking into the chicane, you can tell quite a lot, I think. And sometimes if you're not, if you can't see what you want to see and they're not showing enough and they're just showing these beauty pictures where they look great, the low down camera on the onboard where you're very close to the track surface, but you can't tell anything from it at all. If they're doing all that, spend a bit of time looking at the sector times because they often tell their own story as well. And you can tell quite a lot just from numbers about sector, not about driving, but, who's doing what, where, and to whom. But it's not perfect, I agree. It's by no means perfect. But I always tend to try to get to the races I'm actually physically present at. I try to get out on the circuit and have a look and try to get out to corners that mean something. And I'll be doing that at Monaco, into Casino Square, into the swimming pool, and with a bit of luck, overhead, looking down at the exit of Rascasse, or entry to Rascasse, actually. So, yeah, I'll be at Monaco. It'll be good. Pine XD. Do you think the upgrades being brought will potentially close the gap more to Red Bull, or in an era where they can't be touched? Well, as I say, I think Red Bull are so good now that they will back away a little bit from development as the year progresses. And as they do that, I think the other teams will still be going gung-ho, or some of them will if they haven't spent all their budget. And it might close the gap to Red Bull, but you're going to have to wait, be a bit patient, I think. You're going to see more Red Bull domination in the next few races. Rao, how has your approach to making content changed over the years, considering TV network and YouTube platforms? That's interesting. I was listening to a YouTube guy yesterday, actually, talking about how YouTube has produced and encouraged a standard of TV production that's in many cases higher than TV these days. And that's, of course, true. And there's unbelievable quality out there now on YouTube. And so that's one thing it's encouraged. It's encouraged a voice as well. And I think with this long-term live stream that we're doing now, that's something that you wouldn't do anywhere else other than on a YouTube or a Twitch, for example. You'd never do this on live television. Who would take it? What network would take it? Ad break, too long, soundbite. It would never happen. In my case, I can only speak about my case, but I can go back to, I don't know, certainly the 80s and tell you that even then I was doing proposals to various British TV stations, ITV, BBC, to do some sort of Formula One chat show. And they all thought there'd be no market for it, no interest, and it never happened. And so I sit here now talking about Formula One, and I think to myself, wow, this is what I really was trying to do back in the 1980s. And I think I can't thank YouTube enough, really. It sounds a bit patronizing, I suppose, but to be able to give you a platform, give one a platform that enables you to do short video and live stream like this, to take chat as it's going through, is just amazing. The technology is just amazing, and it's a brilliant thing. I often feel guilty and worry that my production, in answer to your question, my production standards aren't that high, but bear in mind, I kind of do it myself, and I'm a one-man band in that respect, and I've got other things I do in my life as well, Formula One-wise, so I don't have that much time, and I certainly don't rely on teams of people to do stuff. It's quite satisfying to come up with a result that works, kind of. And I don't change it very much because I'm a great believer of if it ain't broke, don't fix it sort of thing. And hopefully that's going to carry on. Obviously, I try to improve the production quality as much as I can within reason. But bear in mind, I try to do everything very quickly, get it out after the race. And I travel quite a lot, so everything needs to be fit in a small suitcase. I can't afford to take lots and lots of stuff because it just takes too long to do all that. And I don't want to carry all that rubbish anyway. So, I've got all these restrictions and I need to get on with it. So, but YouTube kind of works for me in that respect. I think it's, I really like it. At which point, I'm going to try now to show my technical mastery. I've done this before, it shouldn't be an issue at all, to switch over to Shubham Sangodkar. This is the chat. It's about 15 minutes, I think, that I recorded with him just 2 days ago about the floor, the importance of the floor these days in Formula One, and then going on to what McLaren are doing and talking a little bit about Mercedes and Aston Martin. And just to remind you that Shub he's a really good guy. Scarbs rates him as well. And by no means, Scarbs and I are just the same as normal. We're like that. But Scarbs said, yeah, he's a good guy. We should try and give him a bit of airtime. So here we are doing that. And I think he expressed himself pretty well, and it just shows the international nature of Formula One, that that Shub can be out there doing it. So this is another great thing really that YouTube allows you to do. So I'm going to press this now, and hopefully you'll get the dulcet tones of Shub.
We know that a lot of teams have been bringing floor upgrades onto the car, right? And that's been like the major upgrade that people have brought to Baku and to Miami. But, there are a lot of opinions about how floors work and the kind of description that teams put out in terms of what they're really changing, but you don't really get to know what's happening. So probably in this video, I'd like to touch upon how the floor works and then jump into some of the upgrades that McLaren have brought. So McLaren brought these upgrades in Baku, and it was strange because they've had a really miserable start to the entire 2023 season. And even though Baku was a sprint weekend, not really an ideal place to test your upgrades, they still dedicated Piastri to kind of testing the floor. And it was really important for them to try and understand that. And there were signs that it worked for them in Baku, but the performance in Miami kind of states that they haven't really understood what is the sweet spot for the upgrades. So let us see what the floor does and what is the main objective of the floor. So just to get a more global picture, you can think about the floor as, you can divide the floor into three phases, like the front floor, the mid floor, and the rear floor. And the main objective of this floor is to, generate the maximum amount of downforce, but even more importantly, generate that consistently across all the attitudes that the car goes through in yaw, with varying ride heights, and it has to be consistent throughout all those phases, right? So let us look at some pictures that with a small project that I've done with Pure Power Racing, and I'll use that picture to try and then go through each phase of the floor and what it does. So in this photo, you can see basically the underside, and you can see all the vortex structures that are going through the floor. And what you can observe here is if you come to the front floor, which basically is the floor intake and the strakes, the strakes play a huge role as each of them sheds a vortex structure, and the inboard fences and the outboard fences both have different roles in a way. The inboard fences are more responsible towards generating a strong vortex, which lands up dropping the base pressure in the floor itself, which allows the floor to generate a lot of downforce. And the outer fences are more involved towards front tire wake management, making sure none of that front tire wake gets seeped inside the floor. And basically the entire point of the inboard fences is that you have a discrete structure that gets shed from each of them, and then all of them combine to create this really powerful structure that travels through the floor. And that is where the mid-floor comes into picture, because the mid-floor is mostly responsible for managing the vortex merging process and how the strength and the health of the vortex is carried down through the mid-floor towards the rear floor. And then the mid-floor also has the floor edges that we see teams making changes to. And what these floor edges do is they kind of replace the skirts. They create that outwash onto the floor edge, because if you do not create that, because of the suction and the low pressure inside the floor, then seems to be a lot of inwash that comes into the floor, and that kind of really limits the amount of performance that you can extract from the floor. But F1 aerodynamics is not so straightforward. So there is some bleeding of air into the mid floor, and that is really controlled depending on how your vortex structure is, how they're traveling through the floor and how you're managing that. And that you can see from the small cutouts that teams have on their floor edges. And then if you've got all of this right, correct, you'll end up going to the rear floor. And the entire job, you can think about the rear floor basically as the diffuser kickline and the diffuser. And the main job of the rear floor bit is to make sure that these vortex structures, which is now merged, really powerful, as they go through the diffuser kickline, where there is the, where basically the expansion of the diffuser begins, you start landing up going into an adverse pressure gradient. And entire function of the rear floor is to make sure that these vortices are delivered into the diffusers in a healthy manner, because if they are not, then they'll end up bursting and they'll end up limiting the performance of the diffuser. But these vortices are really important because these vortices are what allows the diffusion expansion to be really, really aggressive. And then teams have to manage them because it's an adverse pressure gradient in which these vortex structures are going. And that is basically responsible for some of the vortex bursting phenomena that you see, especially with ride height. And if you see some of the mouse hole cutouts, as they're so famous, we have names for every small bits in Formula One. So these mouse hole cutouts, they are responsible and really, really powerful devices to make sure that, especially at low ride heights, there is enough axial velocity, there is enough free stream energy going into the diffuser to make sure that these structures inside the diffuser are carried along without bursting. And that is basically what the floor is responsible for from a top level.
Just one thing that really caught my attention there, Shubham, a great explanation, is going back to the mid floor section when you said that the floor edges are effectively the 2023 version of what we used to call skirts. And I'm just, at the top of my head, and I see you've got the Adrian Newey book behind you there. Do we think it could be as simple as that Red Bull have just done a better job with effectively creating skirts to contain these vortices and this air?
Well, very much. So, Peter, what's really interesting from what I've understood is the sensitivity of the tools that you're using to develop the floor edges. So you have to make sure that you just don't design and believe what you see, because there's so many variables into picture, right? There is track roughness. There is how accurate is your CFD. There's, how accurate is your front wheel wake. So I'm pretty sure Red Bull must have invested a lot of time investigating these basics, upon which they must have built the foundation, because that is where Adrian Newey's vision came. Like, he would have known that there are so many variables at play that you need to get the fundamentals right before you actually build upon structures that you can kind of trust. And I think that is where the strength of Adrian Newey's experience came in with the aerodynamicists at Red Bull, and they were able to build something that they could trust and build it in a large operating window.
And how much of a factor do we think the Red Bull front suspension layout is, the anti-dive?
Again, I think the fact it's not the suspension layout that kind of is the game changer. It's about the aero platform, the kind of aero platform that we've been able to provide, or the suspension, provides to the aero to make sure that it works in the operating range that Red Bull must have optimized going from 2022 to 2023. They must have had all this data where they realized this should be our operating window where we can extract a lot of performance, and then designed a suspension around it to make sure that the aero platform remains in that operating window as you go through different tracks around the world. So it's not the deciding factor, but it's an enabling factor to make sure that the aero works to its utmost limit.
Now, I know we're going to get on in a second to McLaren, and I'm looking forward to that. But before we go from this generic discussion about the floor, can I just pick your brains? If that effectively is, I don't know, let's say that's the Red Bull RB19 using the air pretty well. What do you think the underside of the Mercedes looks like with its zero pod layout, so-called, when it's out of its operating window, so-called?
Well, that's a very interesting question. So I've done the CFD, or we've done some crude CFD of the W14 as well, right? And we can't really say much about what's happening on the underfloor. Obviously, if they are not able to run as low ride heights as Red Bull is, then their structures will not be as powerful, or might be a bit lossy compared to what Red Bull is. But the main factor is might be a bit lossier in terms of how the merging process happens. But again, this is a very far-fetched speculation. It's like really hard to imitate what these floors look like, and to even try and do CFD, because even like how Andrea Stella has come on and said that millimeters can make a huge difference. We've done a CFD comparison of the Ferrari type of side pods and the Mercedes side pods from what we see at the exterior. But to do anything with the floor edge and the floor is really kind of difficult, and really difficult to know, to be honest.
Okay, we'll come back to you in a couple of weeks when you got all that sorted for us on CFD.
Yeah. yeah, especially if somebody crashes and shows us the floor, which is the big problem. We haven't seen a 2023 floor because the marshals have been explicitly told not to lift the car without having an absolute need to lift the car where the floor is shown.
Now let's move on to McLaren, which is something we have seen, or we think we understand.
So this floor, basically what it tries to do is it manages the suction and how the distribution of suction is throughout the floor, which would mean that, trying to read in between the lines, it would mean that they've gone from a different floor philosophy, which they earlier had. There have been some reports again saying that they've understood the Red Bull floor philosophy from last year's floor and tried to imitate that and found a lot of performance, which kind of led them to deviate from their path, from their own development path. And that is why there is this delay in updates, because they've started chasing a new flow philosophy direction. You can see some bulges which basically allude to some intricate work that they've learned over the past week in terms of how they'll end up managing the vortex structures that we were talking about. So if you read into the official description, what they've said is that the vortex structures are now repositioned, and the way we manage the strength and the health of those vortex structures is much different than what it was before. And this basically alludes to what I was saying earlier, that their mid-floor geometry and their floor edges have changed to exactly make sure that their new floor philosophy ensures the kind of pressure gradient that is required by the vortex structures in order to be strong and healthy as it goes all the way to the diffuser. If you look at the strakes, like the exit of the strakes, you can see that there have been some small bulges and the strakes are a bit more aggressive. In addition to that, there is like the cutout at the rear end that's changed. Earlier, they used to have a winglet all the way to the cutout. Now they have a cutout in isolation, and the winglet is like moved forwards. So it's again like redistribution of vorticity to make sure that it complements their floor philosophy.
So that's the floor edge. Let's have a look at the rear wing of the McLaren.
You can see that, at the start of the year, they were basically the slowest car on the grid. Like their speed traps were ridiculously bad compared to anybody else. And we're talking about like 15, 20 km/h difference. So at Baku, they came up with this really offloaded beam wing that you can see here. And basically, normally you see two element beam wing really cranked up. But in this case, like the second element sits quite high. So almost like a biplane design instead of a conventional two-element wing. So they have almost like a neutral element on top, which would help them to reduce drag substantially. And also they got new rear wing and different flap designs and flap trims to try out depending on what the speed sensitivity of the track was. So, you can see some upgrades on the rear wing and on the beam wing to kind of tackle the drag problem that they have. And it did help them. Like if you check the speed traps, they were not as far as they were, but they're still like at least 8 to 9 kilometers down, not from the Red Bulls, but from the other top three. The Red Bulls are in a league of their own in a way.
You drew our attention to the Aston Martin rear wing in Baku, suggesting that was going to reduce drag. And you seem to be proved correct, because the Aston Martin was pretty quick by the time they got it set up in Miami. That's a different approach to what McLaren are doing there. It was a reduced drag approach, correct?
That looks really nice. It looks like a smooth transition into a smooth cutout at the into the end plate. Looks quite nice.
Very, very good analysis there from Shub Sangodkar. Thank you very much, Shub, for that. And I hope you enjoyed it. I've learned something from that, definitely. And funny to hear him talking about how the marshals have been told not to show the flaws if they can really help it. If a car stops out on the circuit, I'm sure that is the case. All the teams paranoid about their technology in a sport where the technology is the DNA, and that's the selling point. That's what the fans love, we're told. But don't ask any questions about it. So yeah, great to have Shub talking about that in that sort of detail. And you can see the way when he's doing the diagram of the floor, that's all computer stuff, obviously. So absolutely brilliant. So yeah, thank you very much, Shub. And thank you, just a reminder too, thank you to my two partners on the channel here enabling this to happen. Jetcraft and Pitbox, of course. We got some questions coming in different colors. Thank you very much indeed for those. And super chat, whatever. Very nice. This is from Broken STRNG, Broken Strings, probably. Yeah, got it finally. Hi, Peter. Tongue-in-cheek question from my mother. Okay, yeah, we all know what that's going to be. Is mega, the word mega, the Formula One drivers' go-to superlative because they're millionaires? It's probably because it's a very easy, simple word to say. And people like me with simple brains like simple words. I actually started using the word mega without knowing it really, from having spent a lot of time, too much time with a great guy actually called Brian Saunders, who's really fast racing driver. And I think if you're lucky enough to own a Porsche and you want to go and do some driver tuition stuff at Silverstone, Brian is still there as one of the instructors. Really fast driver. Didn't get anything like the breaks he should have got. But I got to know him quite well when he was doing Formula Asia, would you believe, which is sort of mini cross between Formula Renault and Formula 3 on circuits like Indonesia, Philippines. Got to know quite well. And he just had this way, he'd be on the pole or something, and I'd say, "Oh, good lap, Brian, really good." And he'd say, "Yeah, mega." Well, it kind of sums it up, doesn't it? And I think if Formula One drivers say mega, it just means mega. Not much more to say. It's a good motor racing word. You don't hear them saying that very much in cricket matches, do you? Yeah, it was mega. Or probably don't say it much at football either, I doubt. They probably need to say something else there. But there's another one here from Naveen Naidu. Thank you very much, Naveen. It's not a question, actually. It's just a blue thing with an amount of money, which I haven't asked for, but I gratefully and humbly receive. Thank you very much. Very kind. So I'm now scrolling back to where we kind of left off, I think. Let me see. Wow, I'm not going to get through everybody because we're already past the halfway mark, aren't we? Here we go. I'm looking forward to this because I can see there's somebody there trying to give me a hard time about pronunciation of words. So I'm looking forward to getting to that one. I don't know. This is where it's ending at the top. So I don't know if this is the right place to be starting again. But Javier Velasco. Greetings from Santiago, Chile. Greetings to you. Never been to Chile, but would love to go to Chile. Very good friend Eliseo Salazar was from Chile. Good racing driver. Actually, much better than people ever gave him credit for. Famous, I suppose, in most people's minds for that fight with Nelson at Hockenheim. I think it was 89, was it? When they got out of the car, obviously Nelson was lapping him, and they touched, and they were both out of the race. And Nelson ran up to Eliseo and started punching him. And as Eliseo said, he didn't mind at all. He was still wearing his helmet. He said he couldn't believe that the guy was throwing fists at him when he was still wearing his helmet. And he was quite right too. Hikaru, I feel like the cancellation of the Grand Prix might have helped Perez since Imola seems to be a Verstappen's, I'm going to say it, Verstappen circuit. Since Monaco's next, Checo could be for a shot of victory, but Max could snatch it. Yeah, of course, Max could snatch it, and equally Checo could win there. What will Max be thinking? One less race for me to win. Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, there was more, absolutely no doubt that was more of a Max circuit than a Checo circuit. So, yeah, that's more of a loss in terms of if these two guys are going to be very close on points getting towards the end of the year, which is a big if, of course. But if they are, then Imola will be a race that Max will rue the absence of. So there you go. 11th Street King. I like your thinking. There was a bit of inter chat here going on. I like your thinking, Hikaru. Hitesh Aurora. Is Imola completely dead? This weekend is definitely off completely. No discussion, further discussion required. But is Imola dead? Do you mean that existentially as a circuit? I don't think so. No, I think they will continue to come back, and the good folk of Imola and Bologna and that area will still want to go motor racing, won't they? They always have done. Since what? When was the first F1 race at Imola? Was what, 63 when Jim Clark won it? Easily in the Lotus 25. No chicane after the last right-hander at the bottom of the hill, just flat out blind past the pits up to Tosa. Imagine that today. But still the same circuit otherwise. Acqua Minerale still there. I don't think they had the Varianti chicane Alta. They probably just I think they did. Was about the same down the hill actually from memory. Imola, of course, was the circuit where in '79 they held the non-championship race there, which Nicky won. when Carlos Reutemann finished second in the Martini Lotus 79, sorry. And he drove from Monaco in his works factory road car Lotus Esprit, and greeted Colin Chapman on the Thursday afternoon at the track by saying, Colin, no question the Esprit handled better than the 79. 79 wasn't a good car that year. Flex City, Arizona, I think is what you could say. Makul Singh says Monaco could see more teams in fight for the win. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I don't see Alonso being slow at Monaco. Charles Leclerc won't be slow. Carlos Sainz will be there, going quite well. And his new Carlos Sainz sort of version 3 probably right now, maybe version 4. And obviously the 2 Red Bull drivers. And how's George Russell going to be slow around Monaco? How's Lewis Hamilton ever going to be slow around Monaco? He isn't. John Cools, the song Max, 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 Super Max music video has almost 10 million views on YouTube. Really? What's that apropos? Is that apropos YouTube is a great barometer of music? Probably not in that case. Javier Velasquez, how drivers brake and take the turns? This happens so fast. How do you grasp these details? Well, you spelt brake, B-R-E-A-K. I think you meant B-R-A-K. I'm being facetious now. I shouldn't be doing that. But it's, well, yeah, it is and it isn't, because you can, in the same way that if you're driving one of these cars, everything happens in slow motion. The car is built to be driven at the speed at which it's going, if you see what I mean. And it's the same thing when you're watching it. You very quickly become accustomed to what everybody's doing and needs to be doing. And it's quite interesting, actually. You can be a place like the inside of turn 1, 2 in Barcelona, and then watching for the exit of 2 into 3, which is a great bit of road. And then out of the corner of your eye, you can see a car coming down into turn 1, and you can sense that he's going 3 miles an hour too quickly. You can just sense it. And you look up, and sure enough, the right front's locked up, and he's going straight on. It's amazing how the brain works on things like that. Just an orange coloured now. Same person, I think, 440 in another currency. Thank you so much. I'm very touched. No question. I mean, if it was a question, I would answer it, but I don't see a question there. 11th Street King says, I think Checo or Alonso will win Monaco. Yeah, we're good. 2 guys there. Hiteshi Aurora. Imola had to be there. It's sort of Europe's Suzuka. Well, there aren't that many corners at Imola, are there? There's a lot of corners at Suzuka. That's the difference. Imola's actually corner bereft. It's a great circuit. I mean, it's got a lot of undulation, but that kind of fools you into thinking it's got a lot of corners. It hasn't got a lot of corners, but it's a good circuit there. One the thing that always used to intrigue me about Imola, still does, is that when you go out of Tosa, the left-hander, the tight left-hander, and then you go up the hill to that very fast left-hander, which leads towards Acqua Minerale, that fast left-hander, I'd be willing to bet there are fewer incidents and moments and spins or whatever on that corner than any other corner in the history of Formula One. You very rarely see people doing anything on that corner. I've often wondered whether it's because it's a left-hander and people just, I don't know, maybe they're more right-handers, and when it's a left-hander it's all slightly odd, or whether it's because it's at the top of the hill and it's a bit of a blind brow, and so everybody leaves, even if their right foot isn't doing it, psychologically they're leaving a bit of margin, or whether it's just massive grip there or something. I don't know. It's a weird thing, that left-hander. It's got to be, touch wood, one of the safest corners in racing, I would have thought. Makul Singh, I know for sure that Leclerc isn't going to win Monaco. He's got a sort of smiling head with tears coming out of it, which I presume is Charles Leclerc crying. Yeah, don't be so hard on Charles. Anything could happen. Anything could happen at Monaco, just as any other circuit. So, yeah, I know we've had a lot of processions there, but equally, you could say, because Charles, for once, isn't looking to be in great shape, he might just suddenly, everything might just fall into place. John Coolers. Oh, no, here we go. I'm looking forward to this one. It's not Bottas or Lewis or Oscar Piastri or Nick de Vries. I never say Bottas. I always say Bottas. Always. Bottas. But I say Bottas. I don't say Bottas, which is incorrect. I say Bottas. I took the trouble to ask him when he was in GP3 how to pronounce his name. He said it's Bottas. And I said Bottas ever since. Lewis, I always say Lewis, so forget about that one. Oscar Piastri. I've never said Oscar, never. It's always Oscar Piastri. Nick de Vries. I have trouble with the Dutch thing because I do know, I've got some Dutch friends, and quite often they do a sh for Verstappen and de Vries, and so I don't know. So this is a build-up. Okay, it's a build-up saying, why say Max Verstappen? Because I've got some Dutch friends who do say Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen. I know you're saying it's Max Verstappen, John, but actually I think the tone of your thing is a little bit off, to be honest, and I'm not going to go on with this much longer because, as I've said, I have actually answered this question before by saying quite a lot of Dutch people do pronounce it Verstappen. And I try to find a happy medium and sometimes call him Verstappen and sometimes call him Verstappen. But do you call Paris or Paris? Please advise. So Nutella Bra says, do you think so many quality people including James Vowles, leaving Mercedes made them less of a dream team and they're irreplaceable? Or do you think it's the cost cap showing the truth? That's an interesting one. Is Mercedes in trouble? Well, yeah, of course they are. I mean, initially, you can't blame the dog of a car they built for 2022. You can't blame that on the cost cap because that was the car they felt was the true answer to the new technical regulations. What you can blame the cost cap for is that they haven't been able to then just throw that in the scrap heap and build a Red Bull overnight. Well, not overnight, proverbially overnight, because the cost cap wouldn't allow them to do that. So that's why they're continuing to be off the pace. So, the whole idea of the cost cap was to reduce costs and energy and all the rest of it, but also to make the racing much closer, to bring the midfield to the near the top of the grid. In reality, it's actually made racing less competitive because teams like Mercedes and Ferrari can't spend the money that they would normally spend to be racing Red Bull. So, we may have more of a race in the midfield, but does anybody really care about that? I know the fans do when they're given a question on a survey. Would you like to see more overtaking? Yes, yes, yes. But if the rider wasn't, but if that means that Mercedes and Ferrari will never challenge Red Bull and Red Bull are going to win every race, would you still want more overtaking? Then they must say, oh no, I don't want that. So, I blame surveys for all of this. And the reality is, as I said before, I think it would be a great story if we knew right now Mercedes were building a completely new car that was costing a fortune, but nonetheless was going to take Lewis and George to the front of the grid. That's what I think would be great stuff. And same with Ferrari. But we're not going to get that. We're constantly talking about, could they afford to do that within the budget cap? Can they do that? I don't know. It's like refueling, it's like fuel consumption defining a Grand Prix race. It shouldn't. Grand Prix racing should be about the fastest car and the fastest driver. It shouldn't be about fuel consumption. In the same way that the fastest car winning a race shouldn't be defined by a budget cap, in my view. That's only my view. I'm probably the only person that thinks that way, but that's what I think. A few of you hoping that Imola's going to be rescheduled, reduce the summer break and put Imola in there, says Mikkel Singh. Yeah, not a bad idea. I think they'd all say, oh no, we don't have a long enough summer break, so I'm not going to do that. So unlikely with such a busy calendar, says Project 182R. 182R. It's the Dutch way of saying it. Blah, blah, blah. That's going back to that other thing. Somebody here called bipolar mind droppings. So this guy's saying, have some respect for other languages. But I mean, this is incredibly hypocritical, I think, because a lot of people mispronounce names of towns, cities that belong to other countries. And so to start criticizing people like me. Here it is. In 050, this is a new thing I've seen, 049, probably never noticed, or ads will run shortly for some viewers. So if you want to stop the ads, presumably you got to pay YouTube some money. I don't know. Sorry about that if that happens. But anyway, I'm still here. I'm not going away yet. Anyway, enough of all that pronunciation stuff, because as I say, it all comes down to the city, Paris, which most people call Paris, except the French who call it Paris, but we don't make allowances for that. We call it Paris, glibly call it Paris. So long as that is the case, I don't think any other discussion is worthwhile. So putting a line under all that. Franco says, and this is just the sort of message that I wanted at this point. Hey, Peter, hope you're having a great day. I am indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Franco. Suspicious Pixel. Hi, Peter. My heart goes out to the people affected by the floods at Emilia-Romagna. Media has been posting pics when Seb wore a t-shirt showing climate change is serious. Miami Grand Prix underwater by 2060. Well, I shouldn't be laughing, obviously, but I know. And another amount of money from the same person, 440 now in orange. Thank you so much. Stop doing that, please. You're too kind. Thank you. It's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, the BBC, I was looking at the BBC news feed, and there's people on there ranting about Formula One should not be talking about, the BBC should not be talking about a Formula One race being cancelled when it's Formula One racing that causes things like climate change and floods and landslides. I'm not going to go down that path, thank you very much, but I will say that in my view, Formula One does spend too much money on the marketing, the motorhomes, and all that stuff, and needs to look a lot leaner in the paddock area. I know it's a drop in the ocean, all those trucks and stuff, but I think it's important. But I know Formula One has great intentions and will probably achieve all of its zero carbon goals. And I've got so much respect for the technology gurus in Formula One that it would be folly to be critical of their approach. And you've only got to listen to somebody like Pat Simmons talking about the efficiency of a current modern Formula One engine and the job it does for the power it produces, for the energy that it consumes, is just unbelievable. The problem is the teams don't talk about that very much because they're told, they don't want to give away any secrets. So we don't really know. But when a guy like Pat opens up on it periodically, you get a tiny touch of the iceberg of this incredible technology that Formula One has. And that's why there are comments like, Formula One needs to get its act together. Well, believe me, Formula One does have its act together. It's just that we don't talk about it very much. Sorry, they don't talk about it very much. And if you knock on the door of the garage, usually a heavy will come up and say, yeah, what you want? I'd like to talk to the chief engineer, please, just to get some info on the efficiency of your engine, size of the spark plugs, how much fuel you use, weight of the engine, go away. And that'll be it. That's the sad thing, and it's because it's so competitive, obviously. But I do think if Formula One wants to sell its technology as part of its DNA, then it needs to be more open with its technology. And now we should be talking about, amazing efficiencies in Formula One, not sort of having to deal with the criticism of Formula One as being one of the culprits of climate change. GTR 003121. Speaking of 003, I see there's a Tyrrell reunion being organised in July at Silverstone. I think I might go to that. Love to see the Tyrrell family again and all things Tyrrell, really. Also had a lot of time for Ken and Nora. I love Tyrrell. Such a small, compact, great team. And when you think of what they achieved, winning Grand Prix in their first season with their own car, and winning the World Championship. Yeah, winning the World Championship. Unbelievable. 1970, the Tyrrell 001 first race back end of 70, 71 won its World Championship. It's probably never been done before. Alfa Romeo 1950, about it. Amazing. But Tyrrell did that. Anyway, Tyrrell reunion, Silverstone, lots going on, cars, people, not sure of the date. It's around the British Grand Prix time, I think, that sort of week. Hello, Alpha 007 ARG, maybe Argentina, big muscle thing there. Franco, hi. Yep, Project 182R, yes, absolutely the right decision. I thoughts should be in wishes, and wishes should be with all the Italian people, definitely. Richard Fitzgerald, hi Peter, hello from Naples, Florida. Hi there, Naples, Florida. Never been there. I think I'd love to go to Naples, Florida. I always used to read about it in World Tennis Magazine as one of the great places to go to spend a holiday on a tennis ranch. I'd love to do that. My ideal holiday, actually, just so you all know, it'll never happen now, I guess, is to go to somewhere like Naples, Florida, to one of those amazing golf tennis complexes with, let's say three other buddies who all play tennis and golf at about the same standard as me, which is very low, obviously. And my ideal day for 3 weeks is to get up at about 10:30, 11, late breakfast, play tennis when we've digested through to lunch, and then after lunch go and play 18 holes of golf every day, finished about 9 o'clock at night. Wouldn't that be mega? Mega. There we go, Brian Saunders. Right. So lots of hellos. Hello, Dominic Hammander. Hello from Austria. Michael Lawless. But teams that were bringing upgrades won't really get to properly test them in Monaco. That's right. I mean, it's not a place that you'd want to bring upgrades. So if there was an upgrade on the car at Imola that would have worked at Monaco, it would have been on the car for Monaco as well, then they may not be running that upgrade now. You know. Holly Bacon, too bad I can't afford a jet. This was me going on about Jetcraft. So yeah, great company. But yeah, I think you'll be able to afford the pit box though. Pretty much. It's a great company, Australian made. Bit like Rode stuff, Rode mics and all the rest of it. Really good stuff from Australia. Really good. I've got a model of a Lotus Cortina. In fact, I'm going to get it because it's such a nice model, and I think I can get it without tripping over anything. Look at this. Look at this Mark I Lotus Cortina, 1964. This is absolutely beautiful. Made by an Australian company in Western Australia. Opening doors, whatever you want. Just superb. And that's Australian made, mate. Yeah. And it's perfect in every detail. And look at the side. It says Team Tricon. And you know why it says Team Tricon and not Team Lotus? Because Alan Moffat, the great Canadian and then later nationalised Australian driver, was part of, not only was he part of Jim Clark's pit crew in 65 at Indy when he won the Indy 500, but he also then went on to be a mechanic on the Works Lotus Cortinas in 65, back half of that year. And they were driven by people like Whitmore, Chris Craft, lots of really good drivers, Jack Sears. And at the end of the season, and it was sponsored by Ford of America, and at the end of the season, Alan Moffat basically bought, I think 2 cars, maybe 1, but I think 2, and all the spares, and took them back to Australia. He got a really good deal on it because he'd been working on the cars all year. And I remember that car turning up at Warwick Farm, and it was, you could see underneath the olive green stripe, you could see Team Lotus, and he painted over Team Tricon, just another name, just so to make it clear that it was no longer a Team Lotus car, it was Team Tricon. That's what Alan Moffat's team was called back then. And that's just a perfect model from Australia, just like Pitbox. Yeah, mega. Right. Okay. So Sean Hunt says, Peter, couldn't the FIA wait a bit longer before cancelling the Imola Grand Prix? I think a lot of input there came from Stefano Domenicali. I mean, he grew up in Imola, and he's head of Liberty Formula One, and it's his circuit. If he doesn't know if it's okay to run a Grand Prix there or not, then nobody on the planet does. So I think the FIA respected Stefano's input on that one. That would be my guess. I don't think this was just the FIA being, acting too quickly. I think this was well thought through, and I think it's respect to Stefano's opinion that they've done it. Michael Lawless, do you still talk to the old Speed TV crew? Not that much. Obviously, time difference, Europe to America. You can't just sort of sit around and chat, given all the time differences. But yeah, periodically I talk to D. Hobbs. Always have a laugh. Steve Matchett, Bob Varsha, all great guys. Just Frank Wilson, the producer. All good people. If I talk to Frank, it's usually about golf these days, what's going on in the Pro Tour. But yeah, we do. I really miss those days. Good bunch of guys. Really good bunch of guys. Alessandro Durango, ciao from Bologna. Surreal situation here. I imagine it is. Yeah, well, such a sad thing. Ciao, Pillar. Anyone have news about Formula Lino, the Imola cat? Hope he's okay. Is that what he's called? Formulino. Oh, well, I'm sure he's okay. Well, I say I'm sure. I hope he is. ASLPT. Hi, Peter. So sad no Formula One this weekend. So many times we don't have an F1 race. What do you know about the new Mercedes? Well, not much, other than that it was going to have quite a lot of upgrades. I don't think it was a new car. It was this car with upgrades, which are the first of the upgrades for the new direction in which they're heading. So we'll see. And we won't see, actually, as the case may be. But I guess we'll see something in Monaco. King, for the thumb, thank you very much. Pablo Montecinos. Hi, Peter. Do you see Danny Ricciardo driving an AlphaTauri ever? Yeah, I do, actually. I think if Nick De Vries doesn't continue to deliver, I'm not saying I would, but I can imagine Helmut Marko saying, give Daniel Ricciardo a run. I can imagine him doing that. That's all. I can just imagine it. I can't say it's real, but it's an imagination, I suppose. I was just thinking while I was speaking about Yuki Tsunoda and what Honda's, in theory, withdrawal means for him, and whether I presume AlphaTauri are running Ford badging from 26, are they? I don't know. But at the moment, Iwasa looks pretty good, doesn't he? So there's a bit of Japanese pressure there. So yeah, I think Danny Rick might, back end of this year, he might get a race. It's probably what he's hoping. Talk about going full circle. Isn't that where he started? No, he didn't start there, but he did. He did after a while, didn't he? Richard Fitzgerald, great grid, horrible facilities. Now they really definitely have to remodel. What's that, Imola? Quite sure what we're talking about there, Robert. Well, what would that be talking about? Great grid, horrible facilities. I hope you're not talking about Imola there. I love the facilities in Imola. Well, I loved them before Bernie ruined them. We had the restaurant at the top there and the Jacobazzi office next to it where you could go and have a glass and have it with your pasta, and everybody sat around. Bruno Giacomelli, Patrick Tambay and all the boys. We all sat there and had a good laugh. But yeah, you're right. I suppose ever since Bernie took everything away, it hasn't got quite the same charm, I suppose you could say. Mentioning Iwasa, look at this next question. Cody Ganson. Hey, Windsor, who do you think is getting promoted to a Formula One seat first? Iwasa or Lawson, and what season? It's a good question there, isn't it? Iwasa, sadly, will only get promoted if there's money there, I think. I don't imagine anybody running Iwasa on his talent, even though he has obviously a lot of talent. And if I was Yuki Tsunoda, I'd be looking over my shoulder at him for sure. Liam Lawson, I think, is a different subject because he really is quick and he really has phenomenal talent. I put him right up there with Piastri. Slightly different sort of driver, bit more reflexy, bit more adventurous, bit more hang it out, whereas Piastri's a little bit more contained and controlled, I think. But Lawson, really good. Again, it's just these funny things. I remember watching Vettel in Friday, right at the early days when he was testing for Sauber, and watching him going into one of the first Denya at Suzuka And he had a bit of a moment, and his correction and the way he got it sorted was like, wow, this guy's definitely got great car control. And I remember watching Liam Lawson a couple of years ago, semi-wet in Hungary, in the last corner. And he was just brilliant through there as well, offline, using the grip. Just fabulous. Great car control. Really, really good racing driver, I think, Liam Lawson. Can't wait to see him in an F1 car. But how that's going to happen, I don't know. It would be quite a good pairing, wouldn't it? Lawson, Iwasa at Toro Rosso. Quite like to see that. Sean Hunt says this Formula One season is very stop-start. Yeah, well, it is. That's what happens if you have so many races. Eventually it's going to be, some of them are going to get knocked off, and then others are going to continue, and it is going to be stop-start. If we only had 8 races, or 10 races, or 16 races, I suppose we'd make them all happen, wouldn't we? This is very horrible, says Richard, thinking of Imola. This guy says he's teaching grandma right now about the use of the word mega. Thank you very much for that. SQUI 1I6RIM. Make of that what you will. Hey Peter, do you think Leclerc has a reasonable chance of winning the World Championship at any point? I think he has the talent, but I'm not sure he'll have the opportunity. I agree with your second comment, really. I think he has the talent. Oh, for sure he has the talent. I mean, anyone who can win Grand Prix the way he wins Grand Prix, or has won Grand Prix, can win a World Championship. You need to be in the right car and the right team, obviously. And he's not in the right car or the right team. To be in the right car and the right team, not easy from his position, because right now you'd say Red Bull, and how's he ever going to be in a Red Bull so long as Max Verstappen is there? So I don't see that happening. Mercedes, if they come back and Lewis retires, maybe Leclerc in there with George Russell. But to win a championship, the car needs to be very good. And at that point, would he beat George Russell to the championship? George knows the team really well by then, has taken over everything, and the car's great. How's George Russell not going to win the World Championship? For Charles to come in and be quicker than George to the point where he actually outpoints him at the end of the year, a big ask. So I don't know. I fear he may not have the opportunity. I hope I'm wrong. Excuse me. Kartik Kaushik. Do you think Carlos Sainz is underrated? Well, again, it kind of depends on who you've been reading or listening to base your comment on whether he's rated or underrated. I've always felt he's a driver of great Vettel-like car control, not with Vettel's style of driving, but car control level, who thrives on opposite lock and power oversteer. And that gets you that can take you all the way through the feeder formula, no problem at all. In Formula One, it's a different matter, partly because of the tyres and partly because it's too difficult to have that style of driving and not make mistakes pretty regularly. And I think what's happened to Carlos in the last 9 months, even before the start of this year, is that he's found a little bit of a sweet spot now where he's backed away slightly from his raw pace, but he's found a sweet spot where he doesn't have to rely on reflexes all the time, and he can start reproducing what he does well. And that's where I think he's at. I'm not sure he'll ever find the way of becoming as quick as Charles without making mistakes. Here in brackets, you got to say Charles is making a lot of mistakes at the moment, but he's making them, the different sorts of mistakes, and he's making them in a different way. I'm talking about driver error type mistakes, just using, Charles making mental errors more than he is making physical errors. Whereas Carlos, I don't think makes many mental errors. I think he used to make quite a lot of physical errors. And I think they've gone away, and I think he's improved a lot in the last 9 months, and particularly this year. And I think so whether he's underrated depends on whether you rated him or not. That's all I can say about him. I don't think he's got Charles' all-round talent. So if anybody thinks he has, I think they are probably overrating him. But if people think that he's just a number 2 that's never going to do anything again, then they're underrating him, because he's much more than that. I hope that makes sense. Right. We're talking about a lot about Imola stuff going on. Sean Heath says, Peter, your depth of knowledge in Formula One is priceless. Well, it's all right. I mean, it could be better. I mean, I doff my hat always to Nigel Roebuck and Peter Hyam and a lot of friends who are very, very good. Doug Nye and so Maurice Hamilton. But I do my best, and I think if I look at those names I mentioned, they all like something different about Formula One, and they all like something different from Formula One, different from me as well. We all focus on different things, really, and I think that's the beauty of friendships, the beauty of passion, and but so my depth of knowledge in some aspects of Formula One is atrocious, but in some other aspects it's not bad. Glenroy Heath, why do you think Lewis is so much faster with a car with a solid rear versus a car with not so much rear? Surely for a great driver, he should be able to adapt quickly and deliver the same confidence. Well, as I said in the last live stream, I don't think... I mean, if somebody said to... let me read that. Lewis is so much faster in the car with a solid rear versus a car with not so much rear. Really? I don't think that's the case. I mean, if you think about that US Grand Prix that he won when he beat Nico Rosberg, when the oil came down, that was all about the rear losing grip. And that's where Lewis excelled and disappeared into the distance. And also he's so good in the wet. And you could argue that in the wet, the rear doesn't have a lot of grip either. So I actually don't understand why you think he's not fast if he doesn't have a great rear end. As I said in the other live stream, to me, and I'm sure this is the case for all the drivers, the great drivers, they all say what they want is a good front end. And they can all live with whatever the rear end does. They just don't want understeer, which is painstakingly slow. And whether Lewis has got flick oversteer or a solid rear, if he's got a good front end, I don't think it's ever been an issue for him. I've never seen it be an issue for him. So on that basis, I have to say I can't really add much more to what you're saying because I don't actually understand it or think it's true. I don't think Lewis is slower when he doesn't have much rear. Slower than another driver. If you in comparison, I mean, possibly what you mean is this year's car doesn't have a very good rear end and he's slower than George Russell. But I don't think that's we're talking about a few tenths. We're talking about a really bad car, which is trimmed off. And we're talking about bouncing and all sorts of other stuff. We're not talking about a great car with a fabulous front end that has no rear end. That's not the current Mercedes. It doesn't have a front end either. So as I said before, for a guy that's done as much racing as he has with 7 world championships, should have been 8, and has been there, done that, had all the success and money that a man could possibly have, a racing driver could possibly have. He's still doing a pretty good job, gnawing at the bone with all the young dogs out there, isn't he, in midfield? That's one point. And beyond that, as I say, if the Mercedes had a fabulous front end, I don't think they'd be very slow at all. That's the problem. They haven't got a fabulous front end without bouncing and all the things that come with a good racing car to enable them to use their latent talent just to not worry about the rear. So I don't know where you got that from. Somebody might have said to Lewis, do you like a rear end that's solid and has a lot of grip? What's he going to say? Yeah, of course he is. Why wouldn't he? Justin Peters, I think. Was Imola the race where all the Red Bull face were harassed last year and where the Dutch fans were bullied off the stands? I don't know. I don't really watch much of that stuff going on in the grandstands, to be honest. So I'm the wrong person to ask. Sorry. So there's a bit of a discussion here because I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding. Somebody said it's a shame about Imola's race, and they're saying, well, you should be more worried about the people in the country rather than the race, and a lot of that going on at the moment. So I'm not going to go down that path. Nutella Bra says the best drivers have no style. They can do any and all styles to an engineer. They want to be able to do anything they want or can do to shave time off the race. Yeah, you're correct. I mean, a great driver, as I say, depends what you mean by style, of course, and depends what you mean by form as well. I heard Christian Horner saying not so long ago, he was talking about, I think he was talking about Max. You know, yeah, Max is in good form at the moment. I just thought, what's Max like when he's not in good form? And what is form anyway? I understand what form is in terms of statistics. He hasn't won a race for 5 races and suddenly he wins. Oh, he's in good form. Or in cricket, you know, batsman's out 3 times in a row and suddenly hits 100. Ah, he's in good form. But is he a different batsman to the one that got out for the duck for something else? Very good ball. Form is a misleading word, I think. And not that you're using form, but style is also misleading thing, because Lewis has his own style, Charles has his own style, Max has his own style, but those are style versions of great fundamentals. Most of the other drivers don't have the great fundamentals that those 3 have got, but every driver has his own style in some way, in the same way that a tennis player does, a footballer does, a skier does, a yacht racer does. They all have their own styles. And yeah, you're right. And what we really mean is that drivers, the great drivers, have this much wider operating window that Toto Wolff likes to talk about. The drivers have this operating window and they can do a lot more with a car. Fernando Alonso, another one you should include in that. So, and Pinot 187, he's talking about Verstappen, and I'm talking about Verstappen. And then he says Leclerc. I've physically said to Charles Leclerc, how do you like your name pronounced, Charles? And he said Leclerc. So, end of story again. I get a bit wound up about that because, you know, these people, you think you pronounce every word correctly? It is Leclerc, not Leclerc. Don't confuse him with Michel Leclerc, who drove for Williams in 1976. Thank you. Justin Peters, it seems like he's effective. Yeah, but I don't know what that's all about. Where are we going now? M.A. Khan, James Allison and Lewis and Schumi were the best he worked with. James Allison said Lewis and Schumi were the best he worked with. He said Michael was slightly quicker over a lap, but Hamilton adapted brilliantly with the Pirellis in terms of tyre preservation. Well, yeah. I mean, how does he know that Michael was slightly quicker over a lap? And in what year? In the Mercedes years? Or the Ferrari year? Was he at Ferrari? I don't think he was at Ferrari, was he? So about the Mercedes years? I find that, I mean, should I say this or not? I think engineers are entitled to their opinion, and it's great. And I've just talked about Pat Simmons, how good he is when he's talking about the way Formula One technology has evolved with engine development. But I've had my fair share of race engineers, performance engineers, giving their opinion on drivers. And most of their opinions are based on conversations with the drivers in debriefs or in the car, lap times, quality of handshake, and what it's like having dinner. Very few are based on actually watching the driver out on the circuit and looking at what he does. A very good example of that was Frank Durney, good friend of mine, love Frank to bits. But I'll never forget the day he came back to the Williams factory after Nelson Piquet's first drive in a Williams, back end of 85, in a FW10. And he came into my office. Patrick was in my office at the time. And Patrick said, "Oh, Watto, Frank, how did it go?" And it was basically just Nelson getting used to the team. And he said, "Oh, just night and day. It was what a privilege it was to work with a driver who stayed away from all the curbs. He was ultra smooth, brilliant feedback, complete opposite of Nigel, just a breath of fresh air. This guy is just brilliant." And I remember thinking, and he was as quick as Nigel doing all that. And of course, it was all rubbish because to do a time, Nelson had to use all the curbs eventually. And even when he was using all the curbs, he wasn't as quick as Nigel anyway. And that all went down. But then if you took, in those days, there was no social media. There were no instant sound bites. But if somebody had asked Frank Durney that night, how did Nelson Piquet go? That would have all gone out on social media. It would have been, oh, Nelson Piquet, brilliant, never uses the curbs. And, Frank Durney is a pretty serious engineer. People quoted him and still quote him. He's a lovely guy and very knowledgeable in many areas. But I wouldn't talk to him that much about how the drivers actually operate and what they do. And I'm not saying James Allison doesn't know exactly what he's talking about. I'm sure he's basing all that on his own, all his own information. But to me, there is absolutely no way in the world Michael Schumacher at his peak was quicker over one lap than Lewis Hamilton. At his peak over one lap. No way. Sorry, I just totally don't get that. I disagree with it. Built 2JZ Lexus. How much boost pressure in PSI are Formula One cars running? I should know that, but it is a limited amount, isn't it? And they've got an extra electric motor that keeps the valve open, and so they get away with the throttle lag. But I can't remember what the actual boost pressure was. I'm sure somebody here will say, it's this, it's that. Maybe I should look. I think you can look it up just go to f1.com, boost pressure, Formula One, they'll tell you. But I'm sure it's more than your drag car. Your drag car's got 40 PSI. Yeah, I think it is a bit more than that. It's all limited, whatever, to keep for the fuel and everything else. Sahi, Shadari, and power. Shubham Chomu is back. Oh, it's all Indian. Sorry, don't really understand that. Wayora, really disappointing that Imola got cancelled. Would have loved seeing Alonso going for a win this weekend. Yeah. I mean, Imola would have been a good circuit for Aston and for Fernando, definitely. Le Moran, question: if you are Ferrari, what would be one thing you would do before the next race, which is Monaco? I would tell Charles Leclerc to be patient all weekend and not to expect anything to happen too quickly for him, and just be patient and win the race when it's time to win the race. That's what I would say. In a nutshell, obviously it wouldn't be that simple, but I would certainly prevent him thinking that he's going to be mega quick on Friday, and I would get him to settle down, because he's coming out of that bad Miami weekend and that'll still be in his mind. Imola won't have obviously taken anything away. So W. Cooley, thoughts and wishes to everyone in the region of Imola. Absolutely. M.A. Khan, Pat Simmons worked with Alonso, Schumi and Senna. He rated Schumacher as the best. Alonso was fantastic, but slower over a lap. Senna was quick over a lap, but not physically fit, thus affecting races. Really? Tolman days? I don't remember Senna. Maybe Austin 84. Like a lot of other people, he got a bit hot. I don't remember Senna suffering in 84 due to not being physically fit. I don't remember that at all. He was very, very fit, Senna. Very lean, very fit. What does he say? Schumacher is the best out of those three? Wow. Okay. Well, everybody's entitled to their opinion, obviously. Alonso, slower over a lap. Yeah, that's what I've been saying. I think Alonso's not as quick over a lap as he is over 65 laps on a Sunday. That's when he comes alive. And that's a cool thing. He's a racing driver, isn't he? He's not a qualifier. He's opposite to Carlos Reutemann, who loved qualifying, didn't like racing. That's a good question. Faneco. Great question. Is there any driver that can be compared to Mark Donahue on the grid now? No. There will never be a driver to compare with Mark Donahue, in my opinion. He was a wonderful engineer with a very, very clever, logical mind. He was a very, very fast racing driver who had an early turn-in, short corners, and understood completely the dynamics of the vehicle model long before many of the engineers got hold of it. And he was a great guy. I got to know very well in a very short space of time, and I miss him still today, dearly. wonderful guy, kind, and I'll always cherish the lap I did with Mark around the Nürburgring North Schleifer in his black 911 before the 75 German Grand Prix on the Thursday before the race. We did those sorts of things in those days. Hey, Peter, come and have a drive, man. Let's go. And, you know, and that bloody accident in Austria, excuse my language. So, yeah, just fabulous. I mean, I think he was never happy in that Penske team because the Penske was a difficult car. He didn't have great resources back in England. It was a Jeff Ferris car. They didn't have huge resources to go and improve things, and it was a satellite operation in the south of England, and then they went to the March, and it was a basic car, and it was quite good in the March straight away, but he never had a chance really. So great shame. I just wish he'd never come out of retirement. I wish that had never happened. I wish they'd never done Formula One. And when Mark was with us today, and we were still talking about Porsche 91730s and 91710s and Camaros and all the wonderful things that he did. Martin Day. I'm always curious if behind the scenes it grates on teams up and down the paddock that it is a fizzy drinks company that dominates the sport. Fizzy drink? It's a power energy drink, isn't it? I won't tell you what Nigel Mansell once said about Red Bull when he drank his first sip of it. No, I won't. It's not appropriate for this channel. Well, I think most of the teams would be thinking, shouldn't they be thinking, well, at least it's an energy drink. It's not a cigarette company, I suppose. That's what they're all thinking, I guess. Well, there you go. Faneka, I hope you can speak a bit, if any driver can be compared now with Mark Donahue. I was trying to think. No, I mean, he was a gentleman, and he was a softly spoken man, and he was a thinking man. And they don't, I don't know any drivers like that today, really. It's certainly in Formula One. They're all plug-in Formula One drivers who kind of leave the thinking to everybody in the garage, don't they? In terms of the technology of the car. Whereas Mark was always pushing the envelope, looking for the unfair advantage, the name of his autobiography. Michael Lawless. Do you think Charlie Whiting's passing is why there are so many red flags now? Charlie had so many roles and quiet command confidence. Yeah, I think Formula One's, yeah, definitely. I think losing Charlie, and to some extent the Charlie Herbie duo, although Herbie's kind of comes back periodically. I don't think he has much this year, sadly. Robbed Formula One of a decision maker who could make the right call, generally speaking, 99% of the time. And now it just says a lot about Charlie that basically he's been replaced by committees. And now we're in a much, I have to say, I think if Charlie was around today, he would have had to have conformed more to a lot of the protocols that have come into place. And I've said I'm not going to go down the path of criticizing the number of red flags that have been shown this year, because in my view, a red flag, I think everybody involved in the decision making that process makes it on the basis of safety. And I don't want to believe that anybody's there saying, nah, throw out a red, it's boring or whatever. And I think if it's in the name of safety, the point is we're more concerned about safety than ever before. I think the Grosjean accident has kind of heightened everybody towards Tech Pro barriers being brilliant, but equally very important to maintain. And that's why so much trouble is taken now to repair Tech Pro barriers. And if they're in a position where they can be hit again, they need to be repaired, and they take time. There is no way around that. There is, I mean, you can shorten it, but there's no way around replacing them. And I think Charlie would have had that problem as well. So I think we've seen a lot of decisions that wouldn't have happened if Charlie was around, but I don't think he would be just the same Charlie doing the same job, because Formula One has changed quite a lot since sadly he left us. Project 182R. Yeah, Pat Simmons is brilliant to listen to. Feels like his memories of days for days, and love the way he articulates his stories. Always like there's more behind than he can say. Fascinating man. Yeah, a great thinker. I often used to watch in the days when Rod Nelson was race engineer for Fernando Alonso when Fernando was winning a lot at Renault. And Pat was there. And I used to watch him at the end of any given practice session, and everybody else would leave the pit wall and go into the garage, back of the garage, into the motorhome. And quite often Pat would be left on the pit wall 5, 10, 15 minutes, just on his own, looking at data, thinking things through in a very Pat Simmons-y sort of way. And that was one of the great things about that team, I think, was that balance between Rod Nelson, who's a great performance engineer, and Pat Simmons, who was a great engineer, manager with a very clear, logical mind. And then you had Alan Permain, who was just as brilliant, part of the trio, really. Great team. Wayora. Hi, Peter. What are your thoughts about F1 having less pit crew during pit stops? Having the stops longer will cause drivers to give up more track position, maybe more interesting races. Well, I did suggest that last week, or the last live stream. I said, rather than this business of having 3 different compounds that have to be used in a race, which will actually go the other way for Pirelli in terms of having to build more tyres and spending more energy. And in Imola, don't forget, we're going to have this new protocol where everybody had to run the hard in Q1, everybody has to run the medium in Q2, and everybody has to run the soft in Q3. And that was because Pirelli then could be more rational about the tyres, number of tyres they produced. And so that shows the thinking. So the other direction of that would be 3 different compounds in the race have all got to be used, and that would increase the number of tyres everywhere. So, so I said in reply to that, I think it'd be better actually if you wanted to have more place changing and free the racing up a little bit. You could actually make the pit stops a bit more difficult, get rid of half the personnel, go from 2 seconds to 7.5 second pit stops, and within that increase, there are bound to be more errors, human errors, because there will be. And so I don't know if anybody else is now talking about that, but that's what I suggested should happen in the last live stream. But I then said, as a rider, I didn't think that would happen because I think too many Formula One people of power, under the heading of wanting to sell Formula One's technology, but then everything is kept secret. Where's the logic in that? The same thing is, oh yeah, but these 2-second pit stops are part of Formula One's calling card. Everybody loves seeing them. We never want to get rid of those. So whether that would ever happen, I don't know. We've had some other top chats. Michael Lawless, thank you very much, Michael, for that. Thank you for taking the time to share all your knowledge and insight. Very kind. And a donation. Very kind to do that. Thank you. Very touched with your message. So what was the atmosphere in GP2 in the early tests in the 2000 row? Yeah, pretty good. Not the same as Formula 2 used to be in the 70s or the 60s, I suspect, when I wasn't around, but the 70s I was. And the 70s Formula 2 was just like mini Formula 1. There's 3 marches, STP marches, Niki Lauda, Ronnie Peterson, Carlos Reutemann and Bob Wallach in the Rondell Brabhams, just fabulous. And John Surtees over there, Mike Hailwood. But GP2, GP3 became, part of the Bernie Max ownership thing of we will control everything and we don't want Formula 2 becoming too big for its boots, so we'll make it part of the Formula 1 package. Same with Formula 3, and they all have to have their hospitality under one roof. They can't do any entertaining, limited number of passes, make it ridiculously expensive. We'll make lots of money out of this and that. So it wasn't the same atmosphere at all. And my experience always in GP2 and GP3 really is that most of the teams are pretty disgruntled about everything. It's not a great atmosphere, if that's what you're asking about, the atmosphere. As distinct from the days of Rondell Racing or STP March, Jean-Pierre Jarier, when it was just everybody was out there and going racing and having fun, and it was brilliant. So yeah, GP2, GP3 paddocks are very dumbed down places, I think, because of the way it's gone. Got two more here. There's a $10 one. Thank you so much. I miss Speed TV. For pundits sitting in a North Carolina basement studio watching a satellite feed pitching to you on location, added a bit of camp to the melodramatic drivers, team principals. Thanks. Thank you very much. Bit of camp. Well, there you go. I don't know if anybody said that about me before. So yeah, thank you, and to Michael Lawless as well. Very kind. Just on that, it reminds me, sitting in the bunker watching the live TV. Some of you know this story, but when Mario Andretti won the 78 French Grand Prix at Ricard, he, in the JPS Lotus 79, he flew back to Nazareth, Pennsylvania by Concorde. And in those days, ESPN was showing the race deferred, so it didn't go out in the middle of the night. It was going out in the morning, 5 or 6 hours later. And Mario walked in to his house with the trophy before the coverage of the race had started. And they all said, guess what? Oh, you spoiled it for us now, Mario. All due to Concorde, of course. Brilliant. Love it. So there we go. Why do people blow Charles's mistakes out of proportion? He and Max made the same number of mistakes last year. Really? Last year? Really? Yeah, I mean, it depends what you mean by mistake. I don't remember Max. Did Max just sort of drive off the road when he was leading a Grand Prix when nothing happened, as Charles did at the French Grand Prix? I'm trying to think. Did he? He might have. But yeah, it depends how you quantify it all, doesn't it? Some mistakes are bigger than others. I think Charles would agree he makes too many mistakes. I think Max makes mistakes. He made a mistake in Miami, obviously, in qualifying, and he always will. But because he's human, like all racing drivers. Fangio made mistakes. Look at the nose cone of his Maserati 250F going down the hill in 57 in Rouen. One of the great Grand Prix wins for Fangio, but the nose is all dinged in. So, Fanenko, are there any drivers as unlucky as Chris Amon during all the time he spent on the grid? Well, in the sense that Chris Amon is for sure the fastest driver never to have won a World Championship Grand Prix, and in his own right is one of the fastest Grand Prix drivers of all time. No. No. When you think of some of the drivers who've won a Grand Prix, and Chris Amon never did, I mean, it's just scandalous, really. It's just ridiculous. And how many Grand Prix was he leading in 68 when, by a mile in the Ferrari, when some fuel pressure went, or battery or something ridiculous. And he would always be the same old Chris. What a guy he was too. I put him somewhere near Mark Donahue, actually. He's one of my all-time favourite people, racing people. Probably not as technical as Mark, but very similar in some ways. Lovely guy. Just loved his racing. Did it his own way. No fuss, no bother. So, I don't know what this one. Visual Ghoul is saying he could take any line in the past because his car was 2 seconds ahead of the field. I don't know who we're talking about there. So, I really don't. You need to, if you're going to reply to somebody, always put the person's name, because then we know where we're at. Slightly off topic, perhaps, says Abinava Sadusvirayo. Sadasivaro. Sorry, I'm having so much trouble. It's quite a difficult name to pronounce for me. Hi, Peter. Slightly off topic. How do you rate Jacques Villeneuve? Seems like he had a lot of potential to have won more races and at least another championship. How do you pick the right team? Yeah, but you could say had Damon not left Williams when he did to go to Arrows, Jacques may not have won the championship, of course. So 6 and 1, half a dozen the other. Yeah, he should have stayed at Williams, just as Damon Hill should have stayed at Williams, clearly, to have won more races. But I do rate Jacques, and I think he's, of all the drivers, we used that underrated term earlier in the live stream, and I would apply that to Jacques. I mean, how many guys have won the Indy 500, the IndyCar Championship, and the Formula One World Championship, and taken the pole for the first Grand Prix. Pretty impressive record. And he won some pretty good races too. So I rate Jacques very highly, and I wish he had a bit more respect actually in the Formula One world, because I don't think people do take him that seriously when they talk about very, very good Grand Prix drivers. I mean, I wouldn't put him up there with his dad, but I think he's really, really good. Patrick, I'm going to have to stop fairly soon, guys. Sorry. Hi, Peter. For the layman, it's really hard to understand why Mercedes, with all the light behind it, is struggling to keep up. Please keep my 6-year-old brain. Well, I think, if Mercedes knew the answer, they would fix it. And I don't think you've got a 6-year-old brain, because you're asking absolutely the $1 million question, which the Mercedes people themselves have been unable to answer for 18 months. So I've tried my own way to explain it. And what happened at the beginning of 2022 is that the new regs, completely new regs around which they all had to build cars, which were defined by wanting to make it easier to follow the car in front, have more overtaking in Formula One. It moved the whole way that downforce was generated from the wings to the underside of the car. And Mercedes, along with several other teams, never predicted or managed to replicate in the wind tunnel or on CFD, obviously, the fact that the cars at a certain point were going to have a massive amount of vertical oscillation and porpoising. And they just went gung-ho for massive downforce on the car and were shocked, I guess, when the car first ran. And George and Lewis said, we can't drive the car. There's so much porpoising, we can't even see straight. Yet Red Bull managed to predict that would happen and built their car around that vertical oscillation and are still bearing fruit and getting the rewards from that. And Mercedes didn't do that. And why didn't they, with a team that good? Those management groups and those design groups that they have and all that success and all those experience, possibly because of all that, they never thought outside their own particular box or bubble and looked at perhaps some aerodynamicists who had experience with this phenomenon back in the days when there was a lot of ground effect on the cars. Adrian Newey knew all about that. He's been around a long time. And Rory Byrne knew a lot about that, and he's still a consultant to Ferrari as an aerodynamicist. And Ferrari didn't have anything like the same porpoising problems as Mercedes last year. So that's it. They, because of their success, they felt that they could do it. They could move mountains. They don't need to go outside their own box to know how to do it. And they paid the price, and they're still paying the price for it. Jeff Davidson, I'll finish with this one, I think, very kindly donating to the channel, was discussing a few Formula One rule changes to improve racing and wanted your input. DRS push to open similar to Indy, but the time added each lap reverse grid advantage. Example, 20th place 1 second, first place 1/20th of a second. Sounds a bit complicated to me. I just get rid of DRS altogether. Each lap reverse grid advantage. Are you saying you think we should have reverse grid racing as well? I wouldn't be a fan of that. I'm not sure you are saying that, though. I think you're saying that it's the amount of time that you can have the DRS open is based on where you're running in the race. So if you're 20th, you can have it open for longer than if you're leading. I think that's what you're saying. I don't know. I just don't like these artificial aids. I don't like special effects. I just like to see racing cars racing without all that. And I still maintain, and perhaps I should have done it, that a really interesting poll question would have been, would Max Verstappen have won the Miami Grand Prix if there'd been no DRS? I think he would have, and we would have had all those place changes without DRS. But I may be wrong. It's a hypothetical thing, obviously. So thanks for your question, Jeff. My answer is, get rid of DRS altogether. That'd be my answer. But it's not going to happen because even now it's more difficult to follow the car in front than it was in 2022 because they've had to tighten up the rules over the winter to prevent this vertical oscillation. And as a result of that, the aerodynamics is a bit more aggressive now. The floor that Shub's been talking about, and the diffuser effect, and that's made it more difficult to follow a car, and therefore I don't think they're going to lift DRS anytime soon. So thank you so much, everybody, for all your input, all of this. I think I've got through everybody that's asked a special question, if that's the right phraseology. So I can't get through everything, and I'm already late for dinner. I think I've missed my boat on that one. I'll get Kellogg's. It will be for sure. So yeah, I think I've answered all the main questions. That's what I'll make sure I do, because last time I missed some of the questions that supposedly in colour. But I think I've got them all now. I think, maybe wrong. I think I have. I think it's time to do my brilliant close thing. Let me go back to my other channel. Yeah, it's a shame we're not at Imola, but I will do another live stream sometime soon. I'm not quite sure when. Don't hold me to the exact date or time, but sometime over the weekend, probably, in lieu of there being no Grand Prix. And best wishes to everybody out at Imola. Thoughts with those who are suffering, as they are with people who are suffering everywhere in the world. It's just, so much that we should be thinking and caring about. Anyway, enough of that. I'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Thank you to Jetcraft. Thank you to Pitbox. And see you all very soon.